Let's go from the beginning then, and just to ask you first of all, why did you start to think that there was more to 9/11 than met the eye? Did you think that immediately, or grew over a period of time?
I think subconsciously on the day of 9/11, I had my own doubts. I certainly didn't acknowledge them or express them, and again, I feel it was something that was very subconscious because it wasn't until mid-2002 when I started working on the movie, Loose Change, the movie, the feature film that was supposed to be. It was when I started working on that in mid-2002 when I really started to look into 9/11, really started to notice the details, saw a lot of problems, at least problems that I saw, with the official story. And it wasn't just me. There were many people who had come before me, even in mid-2002, who had already expressed these kind of opinions. There were people who were saying it since that day, certainly not as loudly as they are now, but people definitely had their suspicions.
And what was it that seemed suspicious to you? What were the details that struck you?
I'm almost positive the first thing that struck me as suspicious was the collapse of the Twin Towers, because that's the first thing I explicitly remember researching. That's the first thing that leapt out to me. I did get to see the attacks that day. I did get to watch the whole thing. Me and my friend Sandy were kind of in and out of the room, so I don't exactly remember what we saw and what we didn't. It was a very crazy morning, as it was for everyone else. And I had to take off for school at 10:30, give or take. So I might have actually left for class before the North Tower collapsed. I mean, if I went back and figured out what time my class was, I could probably get a more definitive timeline. But the towers was definitely the first thing that leapt out to me. There's obviously far more subjects related to 9/11 that are suspicious, but the Twin Towers was definitely the first and most obvious subject of research for me.
And what was your, just to ask, what were your sort of attitudes towards the politics of the time in 2001, the Bush administration, the people in power?
I followed the election fraud. That was a big thing for me. I was following that. I guess I have to thank President Bush, and I have to thank the Bush administration, because if it wasn't for the outlandish moves that they've done and the total evisceration of the United States Constitution, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be in politics today. I probably still wouldn't care about what goes on around me. So I have them to thank for that. But apart from that, definitely the first thing that I started following politically was the election and the numerous controversies surrounding that. I remember getting coffee in the coffee shop and seeing the story unfold in the paper. Like I'd go in one morning, get coffee, see what was going on, go in the next day, see that they were trying to overturn it, but it wasn't working, and that there was this other person who was fighting it. So that was definitely the first thing that leapt out to me. So I had my suspicions about the Bush administration before 9/11 even came around. Certainly not as suspicious as I am of them now, but I knew something was wrong. I could tell that there was something fishy going on.
The inevitable question, though, is why? Why would people in power in your country perpetrate such a horrific... why would they do that?
Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't they is really the best answer that I could... It's the best answer to sum up everything, because in reality, look what the Bush administration has gained because of 9/11. They've been able to use 9/11 as a pretext for virtually everything they've done since that day. Obviously, the invasions of Afghanistan, Iraq, the Patriot Act, Department of Homeland Security, the Military Commissions Act. They've abolished habeas corpus, which means that you have the right to face your accuser. This all stems from the war on terrorism, which is grounded solely on the events of 9/11. It's not like they got up one day and said, well, we had Oklahoma City and we had 1993. That day, the day of 9/11, there were politicians, military figureheads, all kinds of people getting up on television already telling people that day that your civil liberties are about to be taken away. We're going to have to increase surveillance. We're going to have to do this. We're going to have to start a global campaign against terrorism. Some people even use the phrase war on terrorism that day. When it comes to responsibility, I certainly don't place the blame on President Bush. I certainly don't think Bush did 9/11, as some people might say or believe. I also don't think that the Bush administration alone was responsible for it. I do believe that if there were two people in the Bush administration that we could bring into a courtroom and actually, subpoena and asked them about 9/11, it would be Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. Dick Cheney because he was in the POC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Command, the bunker underneath the White House. He was there the whole morning. He was there before the Pentagon was even struck. This is confirmed by him. This is confirmed by Norman Mineta. This is even confirmed by photographs that were taken that morning. Cheney was in the bunker before the Pentagon was even struck. And the Secretary of Transportation, Norman Mineta, when he was testifying to the 9/11 Commission in 2004, was recollecting his events, or was recollecting his actions on that day. And he went through the timeline about how he heard about the first plane. He left his offices, headed down towards the White House. The second plane had struck, got there, got into the basement. Says that when he got into the basement, Dick Cheney was there, and in an extended interview that he did in 2006 with an activist group in Seattle, We Are Change, he confirmed to them that Lynn Cheney was there as well. So when Norman Mineta arrived at the POC at approximately 9:20 or 9:25, this is according to him, Dick Cheney and Lynn Cheney were already there. So the first tower had been struck, the second tower had been struck, and a third plane was on its way to Washington, D.C. Norman Mineta's exact words go as follows. During the time that the airplane was coming into the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned, whipped his neck around, and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Now, if the orders that Mr. Mineta and Mr. Cheney and the young Abe were referring to, if those orders were to intercept and shoot down Flight 77, it would have happened. Because if the orders were to shoot it down when it was 50 miles out, it would have been shot down. There's almost no question about it. I mean, 50 miles is more than enough time to get something up in the air. I mean, they had military aircraft flying all over that morning. They don't want to talk about some of them, like the E-4B Doomsday plane, but there were planes up in the air that could have intercepted at 50 miles out. If the orders were not to shoot it down and to allow it to strike the Pentagon, that to me seems like a much more credible explanation, because honestly, if someone had told you there's a plane heading towards Washington and we need you to shoot it down, if someone had said to you the orders are to shoot it down, you wouldn't respond with incredulity the way is it incredulity? Is that how you?
Yeah.